increased focus on standardized testing as a teacher, I'll just start personal.
Sure.
And this was what actually ultimately got to me, is that kids aren't children anymore. They aren't students. And this is regardless of whether they're young or even high school. They aren't students anymore. They're data points. Are these kids going to pass? Are they going to fail? It makes the relationship between teachers and students adversarial, so that you, the student, are how I'm going to be judged, and I'd better get you to this point. And the student has a tremendous amount of pressure on them.
Hey y'all, welcome to the Texas Forward podcast. Today, Brian sat down with guest Toni Wing-Jenkins. She has spent over 30 years in public education as a teacher, and in this interview, she shares her various experiences from within the different school systems. She discusses the pressure Texas standardized testing puts on both our students and our teachers alike, what it was like teaching overseas, how we can help young adults succeed in college, and what we can do to ensure it's more accessible for all. Toni is also a member of the Texas Forward Party Executive Committee and has been helping our policy committee to track bills over the 2023 Texas Legislature session. She shares her insights from this legislative session and what we are doing to activate our fellow Texans to help keep them informed and engaged. Some of the topics covered include the pros and cons of school vouchers, also known as education savings accounts, the lack of increase in teachers' pay here in Texas, and the alarming number of bills having to do with elections. This conversation is an important one, and if you're a teacher, we hope you feel seen and know we are rooting for you. Thank you for listening, and as always, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Texas Forward podcast. I'm Brian Lee here with our guest, Toni Wing-Jenkins.
Hello. Great
Toni.
to be here.
Great to have you. So, you've been in teaching, you've been in education basically your whole career.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, so you became a teacher in 1985?
Yeah, in public schools, public school teacher.
Excellent. So, take yourself back to when you were deciding what you wanted to do with your life and when you decided that teaching was what you wanted to pursue. What motivated you to get involved and become a teacher?
It was a teacher, actually. I think that's true for a lot of teachers. It was my 6th grade teacher, Mrs. Bennett. And she did things, and this was in the 60s, and the late 60s. And she did things in the classroom that was just absolutely amazing. When I look back, we were in charge of discipline, and we had court every Friday. We did this independent study stuff. She did things that I did when I taught 5th grade decades later. And
that's so cool.
She was amazing, and that made me want to be a teacher. I wanted to be just like her. She had a party for us the last day of school, a pool party.
Really?
Served us food on trays like we were the most important people on the planet. So yeah.
Man, that's valuing the students. Right?
Oh my goodness, she really did.
Well, shout out to Mrs. Bennett.
Yeah, she was fantastic. So that was what started it. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, did you ever think about throwing in the towel, or were you pretty much gung-ho the whole time?
I don't think any teacher doesn't think about throwing in the towel, especially as high-stakes standardized testing became more prevalent. That made it really hard. And when I retired in 2017 from public school, I thought I wasn't really ready to leave. I really still enjoyed teaching. I still enjoyed kids. It was just it was a difficult culture, and I didn't have what it took to continue. It was just too much.
Oh, fair enough. Well, yeah, I mean, you made it a long time in public school, 30 years of teaching
yes.
public school.
And I taught preschool at a private school after that, which was a blast because you could teach the way I did in my earlier years, just making sure kids learned and having a good time. So,
yeah, that's what it's all about, it sounds like, right? Mm-hmm. So the standardized test, I actually was thinking about this as I was preparing for this call. So when did that really start to when did that go into effect, first of all?
Well, it's always been around.
Yeah.
I mean, even back in the late 60s, early 70s, I remember taking the Iowa test of abilities, and that's a standardized test, but it was used to see how kids were doing. It was used to identify if someone needed to be advanced a little bit or needed extra help. It wasn't used to define the student. It wasn't used to define the school. Really high stakes standardized testing, a lot of it came out of Texas. It was 30 years ago that there was the toss, and they really began pushing testing and judging schools and teachers by that. And over the years, they tried to link it to teacher pay, and it became more national. In fact, the woman who I'll think of her name. She was the one who actually designed this whole testing program for the Bush administration when he was president. Second Bush, not first.
W,
yes.
Yeah.
When he was president, has now turned against it. She's completely against the plan that she helped design. Yeah, she's seen what it does. Alfie Cohen wrote books in the early 90s calling about the danger of standardized testing, and everything he predicted in those books has happened.
So what ultimately has been the impact of the focus on the increased focus on standardized testing?
The increased focus on standardized testing, as a teacher, I'll just start personal.
Sure.
And this was what actually ultimately got to me, is that kids aren't children anymore. They aren't students. And this is regardless of whether they're young or even high school. They aren't students anymore. They're data points. Are these kids going to pass? Are they going to fail? How am I going to be judged? They become data points, and you sit in a room with little Post-its on the wall with kids' names on the Post-its or their IDs, so that I know who they are and other people don't, and they're grouped into probability of passing and what they're data points. That's all they are, and it makes the relationship between teachers and students adversarial, so that you, the student, are how I'm going to be judged, and I'd better get you to this point. And the student has a tremendous amount of pressure on them, and they know that it's more than just how they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're
what's best for them.
What's
right?
best.
Where
and they're being
judged
judged by this one day. I mean, I have a grandchild who last year faced her first year of STAR testing, and she was almost ill. She was so afraid. And her teacher was wonderful. It wasn't the teacher. It wasn't her mother. Nature knows it wasn't me. It was just knowing everything was banked on this one test.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of pressure, that's for sure.
And it's tricky, and the tests are tricky. That's how, for a teacher, it puts you at odds with yourself and with the students. The pressure is put on the kids, and then you're teaching strategies for passing the test rather than actual skills. And as much as they've tried to incorporate, I'm sorry, I'm going to do air quotes.
Air quotes are allowed.
Okay. High order thinking in tests, which if there are teachers listening right now, they're laughing hysterically. All that means is they've made it a little trickier. They've made it harder for kids to find the answers. It's not really higher order thinking. It's learning how to deal with the test itself rather than thinking creatively or thinking abstractly or thinking critically. Thinking critically.
Yeah, I mean, and I have always grown up in the world of standardized testing. I mean, that's all I knew, have known. And that's just, when I think about our education system, you're memorizing things. You're not learning how to think. That's a criticism that kind of comes to mind when I think about it just at large. And maybe that's largely as a part of this standardized testing.
And they've made an effort to make it less memorizable, I guess, that you can't memorize. But in the process, it's tricky. That's the only way to. I'd love to see adults when you pass out tests for adults and have them have to take just the third grade reading test. When I taught fifth grade, I taught everything. And so we'd go over the science test and we'd analyze the answers together with the kids. And we'd say, why is this one not right? And they'd go, oh, they're trying to trick us. I mean, really. And then so the kids are facing this test where, oh, yes, that's what you think it is. But then when you think about it this way, it's this one. And so you've got, I'm sorry, I've got a board here. It's a little known fact. I have my whiteboard here. But
we'll add a digital chalkboard
into
later.
Teacher mode here. I'm pointing to the board. I'm sorry. But it really is. And so then the kids even know that it's tricky. And
oh, wow.
So you're teaching them how to look for the strategies of passing the
gaming
test.
the system.
Gaming the system.
Yeah.
That's putting it wonderfully.
Yeah.
And now it's all on computers. Most of them are computer based, which kids are more computer savvy than a lot of adults are.
Definitely.
But still, the strategies they're being taught have to deal with, pieces of paper. So it's really difficult. It really is.
Yeah, that's unfortunate for sure. So you've taught in a number of different environments. So you mentioned you taught at a Christian preschool for 3 years. You spent 30 years in public school in Texas, or started in Louisiana.
Yes.
And then moved to Texas.
Yeah, $10,000 pay raise.
Wow.
Yes, that was a big difference.
Wow, Texas.
Yeah, it was a great district, and I loved the school, but
Yeah, that's a significant amount of money.
that's a significant amount of money.
And then you had mentioned before the interview today that you actually were teaching in Germany for military members,
Yeah.
students. That I didn't know that existed. Tell me a little more about that.
That's Department of Defense dependent schools, and where you have military families, you've got to have schools. You have to have education, and so they have schools usually on base or on post, depending on what branch it is. And there are teachers from America who go there and teach, these American kids. And it's a great experience. Oh my gosh, I loved it. And,
I'm sure.
Yeah, and you've got teachers there who are the kinds of people who are willing to go to a whole new country around the world and teach. So you've got a more creative spirit to the school.
So how did you get involved in that? What made you want to do that?
I was a military brat.
Oh, okay.
And so I spent my life in Dodge schools and on military bases and things like that. So, and when I was...
So it was natural for you.
Yeah,
That was,
It was really kind of like going home. And when I was in grad school, I was putting in for job applications, and I found online to put in for a job. So I thought, it can't hurt. And then got a call like 4 years later asking me if I was interested in the job. So I
that's
went.
a slow recruiting process.
Slow recruiting process. But my kids loved it. My son was in high school then. The other kids were younger. We were there for Desert Storm. We were there when the wall came down, Berlin Wall.
Wow,
came down.
that's pretty cool.
Oh, it was wild. So it was a great experience for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you speak any German?
I am horrible at German. I am so ashamed. My daughter went to a German preschool, my youngest, and was fluent in German. And there were times I'd say, speak for mommy. Because there was something about the language, I couldn't get the pronunciation down. But I found that when you have your dictionary and you're not the ugly, screaming American, and you're pointing to words and really trying, they're very good-natured towards you.
They respect the effort.
They really would. They respect the effort.
No,
but it was great.
That sounds really, really cool.
It
A really
was.
cool experience. Yeah. So on top of that, so all those different places that you've taught, what were the differences? I mean, besides the pay raise, any noticeable differences in specifically Texas and Louisiana in just the quality of the education and just any big differences that come to mind?
I've got to say I was really in a very good school and school district in Louisiana. It was a rinky-dink little school district, Albany, Louisiana, and I have former students who are teachers there now, which is so cool. But and they were very progressive in terms of trying things that other schools weren't. So I've got to give a shout out to them. Mm-hmm. Testing, the LEAP test in Louisiana was to me significantly, and I don't know what it is now, but in those days, even though it was, very important and high stakes, it was a more reasonable test. For instance, the math test from 5th grade forward allowed kids to use calculators because in real life we use calculators. And so the problems were such that you had to be able to think the problem through. So the calculator may keep you from making silly mistakes.
Sure.
You know? Otherwise, you still had to critically think, and there were writing parts of the math where you had to explain your thoughts and your answer, and those were coded. Reading was the same way. It wasn't just all multiple choice you had to write. So I really liked the testing when I came to test. No, I didn't like it, but and by comparison, when I'm looking back from Texas, I think, oh, that wasn't half bad. And then I came here and no, kids cannot use calculators. And I said, but why? You know? And it was a very different culture of testing. And it was really a shocker. Now, I was fortunate. I searched online when I was looking for a better paying job. I was a single mother. And I searched for brain-based fifth grade teaching. And brain-based was this theory of teaching with the way kids think, using brain-based education.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Eric Jensen, who was just fantastic. And I found a school in Texas, in Burleson, that was a brain-based school. They were just opening up, and so I interviewed and got that job. On the one hand, it was amazing to be in this school that was entirely using this form of teaching and education, and it was this whole different culture of schools. And I helped open it up in 2000, and my granddaughter's there now, which is a special thrill.
Oh, that's awesome.
But the testing just blew my mind. I couldn't believe the pressure it was in Texas in terms of the testing.
Huh. So, yeah, tell me a little bit. I mean, it seems like you said it. It's pretty straightforward. So the brain-based education was basically just more aligned with the way that
Kids learn and think. Exactly.
Well, that seems pretty like how every system should be, right?
It does.
What's the opposite of that? It's more standardized, or
more standardized,
analytical, like a.
And many schools have moved away from that sort of thinking, although it's really hard to move away with testing, the specter of testing over them. But it's more repetitive, using more worksheets, less literature, expecting kids who are kindergarten, first graders to be sitting in their seats for long periods of time, doing worksheets and reading and learning by this time. And the more brain-based is allowing kids to get up and move, trying to teach with movement, structuring your classroom differently so kids take more responsibility for their learning, those kinds of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I can't help but think the first one you mentioned there is more like training them for the assembly line back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the theory it was based upon, which our culture and our society isn't that any longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, that
Definitely
is.
not.
But you still find it today, even though schools have tried to move away from it, it's still pretty prevalent.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, do you think the quality overall of education, and you kind of touched on this with what you've mentioned with the testing, but do you think the quality of education has improved or declined since you got started?
That's a tricky question. Teachers, and even when we were talking about the type of educational program where you're doing the sitting and everything, those teachers still care. They're just dealing with a system that pushes that on them because they're trying to get kids ready for this test, or they're trying, this system is foisted on a lot of teachers. When I first began teaching, it really wasn't like that. I mean, you could try new things. You could, the goal was for kids to learn, but there was more responsibility on the teachers, more respect for teachers' ability. It wasn't the attitude of them, the world, against us as educators.
Well, it should never be like that. It seems.
But that is, look at it now. But I'm going to jump, so I'm going to try and stay right here for just a moment. But I mean, that's how it wasn't like that. And you could meet with families and meet with kids, families when there was a problem, and it was something you could work together with parents over.
Yeah.
Though not in every case, but in most cases you could work with the families, and if there was a problem, you could fix the problem. If kids needed extra help, it wasn't an adversarial relationship. Over the past 30 years, for whatever reason, it's become more adversarial. A lot of societal problems have been blamed on teachers and on education. Power has been taken away from teachers and under the guise of improving education. And that's the justification for standardized testing. It's we've got to make sure these teachers are doing it properly.
Yeah.
We have to follow up on them. We have to judge their schools. And just that subtle, and there are people who like it who go, oh, no, that's not it at all. But let's get real. That's what it is. That was what it
they're
was for.
micromanaging teachers.
Yeah, they're micromanaging teachers. And as that's happened, the pressure on teachers and the workload on teachers has tremendously increased, especially if you care about what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you're doing what they're requiring, but then you're also doing things you know are right. So you're doing the double workload. I used to joke about that I spoke 2 languages. One was the language of my teaching that I was doing every day, the work I was doing for that. And then there was the language of what the state wanted me to do. So I had to kind of restructure things so it made sense to them. So I was speaking 2 languages, which meant I was doing 2 workloads.
Yeah.
I was doing the stuff they wanted, but then also doing the stuff I knew was right. And I don't think I was the only teacher. In fact, I think most teachers are exactly that way.
What a pain. And inevitably, right, you're going to lose some of that time that you want to be doing things the way you know is right because you're trying to jump through these little loops and hoops and stuff that are set up.
Drive by
the state.
any school at 6 o'clock in the evening and you're going to find a bunch of cars in that parking lot. And it's not that everybody's parked there because there's overflow from softball practice or something. It's because there are teachers in those rooms trying to get the things done that the system requires of them, but also doing the things that are required to them to be a good teacher to the students they have. Any school.
Man. Yeah, it definitely doesn't make sense for those 2 things to, be opposed. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's made it harder for teachers.
Yeah. So just speaking to the, quality of education in general, shifting gears a little bit more to the politics side of things. So that was such a huge part of the conversation the founding fathers had was for this democracy thing, this crazy thing we're going to try to work. All of them agreed on both sides of the argument. James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, whoever you're talking to, foundationally was that we have a very well-educated population. It's always just been such a critical thing in terms of getting our being competitive economically, internationally. All these different reasons. Do you think that kids are leaving K through 12 now and are being you kind of answer this as well. Do you think they're ready for the workforce, and what can we do differently, to better prepare kids for life after school?
That's a big question. Recently, TEA, along with a group of community college and in Texas and Texas universities, looked at how kids are doing in Texas universities, and just a little over 50% of all the freshmen who enter Texas universities actually finish with a degree within 6 years. So that's giving them an extra couple years to get it done. A little over 50% actually make it through. That means less than half of the kids drop out, slightly less than half of the kids drop out from college. And yet 85% of the jobs that were created last year, and Texas led the country with new job creation, required some kind of post-high school studies of some sort, or at least an industrial accreditation of some sort, from university to one or the other. So something's wrong that when you had that many kids not making it through. And a lot's been done to address that, but there are kids who are successful in school. There are always going to be kids who are successcul. The type A personalities like me in school who always had my little notebooks.
Yeah.
And yesterday I was in the drugstore and I was looking at the composition books going, oh, I remember having these. I love these. So that was me. I'm going to be able to succeed in spite of everything.
Done, right?
Yeah, I'm going to get it done. But there are kids who aren't that way.
Yes.
And you look at the economic the economics of our society right now and our social system, the kids who come from a more impoverished background are not going to succeed as well in school. And there's a high number of kids who come from low-income backgrounds.
Yeah.
Across Texas, just staying with Texas, never mind across the country, we have a high number of low-income kids. So no, we are letting our kids down to a great extent. Just those two facts there.
Yeah, no question.
Most of the kids who fail STAR tests are kids from an impoverished background. So we're failing them. A lot's been done. I got to give Texas credit. Recently I looked into it myself and I was surprised how much was available. The state has put money into CTE programs in the schools, in the high schools. And
what are CTE programs?
CTE is our technology programs, preparing kids for high demand jobs that can be done in high school as a part of also finishing a high school diploma, but getting certification in these areas.
Yeah.
And those have actually been around for a while, but they've really invested a lot of money into it. But when you look at a map of Texas and where it's available and where it's not, there's a lot more not available, especially in rural Texas and in the Panhandle. So we've got these programs in place, and they're wonderful programs. They really are. I was amazed at what's available, and they're working in conjunction with community colleges. So you've got this going on, but it's not available throughout the state. So that's something that needs to be addressed because those kids in rural areas desperately need this.
Yeah.
And they have programs where kids can finish the first couple years of college while they're high school students. And those are geared toward kids who might be less likely to be able to go to college. And that gives them a leg up. And I'm sure of your listeners, everybody knows someone who just finished high school and has a associate's degree along with it. We have that in Burleson. BISD does that. So we're doing things. It's not enough, though. More needs to be put into that area.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's great, though, to know that there is something that's working. Yes. Now we just have to do more of it, right? We need to spread the wealth a little bit. And that's something we hear. It just seems like a reoccurring theme across so many different spectrums here in Texas is, but what about the rural communities? You know, we're leaving them out in so many ways, it seems like.
Yes, yeah, that's in another state that will remain nameless, they just voted, the governor signed, it was yesterday, their budget, but drew a line through all the stuff that was taking money away from the rural part of their state because they wanted to pump more money into areas of their state that had greater population growth. And it just, which I kind of admired her with the line, and they said she can't do that. And she said, well, I just did. And I liked that. I was reading the story. But we have to be careful because the current voucher bill, SB 8, which is right now, sitting there. SB 8, which has not gone away. We wish it would, but it hasn't.
Yeah.
The biggest problem is it isn't helpful.
Yeah.
It isn't helpful to rural areas. Even the House bill, which is a touch better than the Senate. In other ways, but we are trying in this state to help our kids, but there's more to be done. And the fact that so few kids manage to finish college. Now, some of it is there's a pressure to go to college.
Sure. Maybe they're not a college student.
Maybe they're not college, and you might say, well, maybe they're not college material. But there's also that standardized testing, and it's what Alfie Kohn said. You're going to teach kids ways to pass tests, and they aren't going to be able to critically think. And we all know that once you get past those first couple years of college, it's critical thinking. Yeah. It's analysis. It's being able to write essays without AI to help you do it. So we're letting kids down, especially in that way.
100%.
Talk to any college professor; they'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned it. It's a systemic thing that's taking good teachers and preventing them from being able to teach the way they want, and they're being kind of shoved down by this system. We can think of something else where the system doesn't allow people to operate in the way that they otherwise would in politics. People get into running for office and we have this system with the two major parties that in order for you to get reelected, you have to, play by their rules kind of thing. Even if you go to Washington with the best of intentions, eventually.
Or Austin with the best intentions.
Exactly. And you had mentioned school vouchers. So this is something you're very passionate about. Frankly, I've not heard a lot about, what the pros and the cons are for school vouchers. So and you can start, would you like to start with the pros or the cons?
I'll start with the pros, which people who know me are probably fainting dead away right now. Okay, wake up, everybody. The pros are, and I really didn't think about the pros because vouchers have been around for a while. And here, now they're calling in education savings accounts, which is a more palatable way to say it. But in my own family, during COVID, I had a grandson whose mom decided to homeschool him at home, obviously. And he's done wonderful, and she's continued to do so. But everything they do, the curriculum they buy, the amazing amount of materials, the work she does, it's all out of pocket. There's that. So having some kind of voucher plan or educational savings account would mean that someone who is doing this at home and doing a good job at it could have a little bit of help. And I understand that because that's in my own family. Also in my own family, there was a situation where one of my grandkids, they wanted him to possibly be able to do online at home post-COVID. And in order to do that, you have to pay for it. Whereas if he'd started at the start of the year, it wouldn't have cost anything, but to start mid-year, you'd have to pay for it. And it was expensive. And I thought, boy, if they had those educational savings accounts, that would pay for that, wouldn't it? And then you have families who want to get extra help for their kids. And that was a part of the both bills, the one out of the Senate and the House, would be extra money for their children. For tutoring or for, in terms of special ed, for maybe materials which are supposed to be, by law, by the school, but there might be something that the school says, nah, you don't really need, but the parent really thinks would be helpful. That would help pay for that as well.
Sure.
And there are kids who have, learning challenges that make it very difficult for them to function perhaps in a regular kind of classroom. And the parents would like to send them, and that's what the House bill dealt with, would like to send them to a private school or a special setting. That would help those parents as well. So I see that side of it.
Sure.
And those are trying to help families, because not everybody's cookie cutter. So you have situations that may be public school, contrary to what Horace Mann wanted, is not going to work for you. So I understand that.
Sure. Okay. So
did that sound fair?
It does. It does sound fair. I appreciate that. So what are the cons? What is the negative side for school vouchers being?
The cons are that money is taken away from schools, and you say they're not taking money from schools, but there's X amount of money out there, and it's going toward this. That's one of the cons. The cons are that it's wonderful, especially, we'll talk about the Senate bill first. It'd be great in areas where there's lots of private schools, but what about in rural Texas where there aren't private schools? So money is being pulled out of schools to support having where there are private schools. Two, our money, our tax dollars are going to support private schools, which that's obvious. I don't even need to explain why that doesn't work.
That's not what those are for.
No, that's not what that money's for. And then there's the issue of teachers, and we're back to those teachers. But the legislature has not put money into teacher pay. It's been a drop in the bucket. They just had a commission, AdBed had a commission asking why teachers are leaving the Texas school systems. Mm-hmm. And one of the big things was teacher pay.
Yeah.
And yet they're not touching that. There was a minuscule amount but it's a drop in the bucket. It's not even worth it. It's a slap in the face. So when you put a lot of money into funding outside Texas schools and give nothing to Texas teachers, It is. It's just a slap in the face.
Yeah, I mean, you're just draining the system.
You're
right?
draining the
You're
system.
just inevitably making.
And you're playing
public
games with
education
money. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, go ahead.
You're playing games with money to say it doesn't impact education. Money. That's ridiculous. You're playing games.
Definitely. And that what you said too at the beginning is like, are there even enough private schools to do this? If this was the perfect solution, there's so many fewer private schools than there are public schools and number of students, right? I mean, that math just doesn't make any sense.
And you have private schools are in a totally different. They can accept kids or not.
Mm-hmm.
Public schools can't. We take everybody. We love them.
Yeah.
Private schools, you accept who you want. You can say no. And they don't deal with standardized testing. Now, the House bill did try to take a stab at getting rid of STAR and bringing in a new system, although, I take a deep breath and go, okay, sure. But they did say that if someone took state money, they would have to take the STAR test. But I can't imagine what, frankly, that'll be like for some private school trying to test just some of their kids and not others and such. But they did at least try that. But face it, they don't face that which we do.
So private schools don't deal with that?
Mm-mm.
Well, that's
No,
interesting. But everyone deals with standardized testing to a degree in terms of the SAT, the ACT.
Yeah. But they don't have the high stakes standardized testing.
I see. Ah.
And I'm sure they probably do give. I know at the private school I taught at, even though it was a preschool, we did do some testing, that we tested all the kids and assessed where they were. But it was more like in the good old days of testing, where you sat down, you tested your kids at the end of the year, you analyzed what you did well, and you looked at where you could have done better.
Coaching.
Yeah, and you sat. In fact, I sat across from the table from a teacher, and we looked at it and I looked at his and said, "Oh, you did better with fractions than I did. You got to tell me what you did." And when the year started, we looked at the scores and went, "Ooh, we've got this issue this year with this group. We need to work on this. Look at how she did. I better start with her, helping her with that." But it wasn't. It was meant to. It was a cooperative coaching kind of
you're on the
thing.
same team.
You're on the
working
same
together.
team. It wasn't. We weren't judged at all. So private schools can be more in that realm
That's
than public
interesting.
school teachers.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, it seems like there's benefits to being a teacher in private schools in that regard.
Except pay. Pay isn't as good.
That's
Yeah.
okay. That's a big one too.
Yeah.
Then, but ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway from what you just said there is private schools can choose who to accept.
They can choose who to accept.
Everybody needs an education. They need a quality education.
Yes.
So we can't, and it's already stretched so thin in terms of the budget and what resources are being allocated. We need more money in there, not less, right?
Yes. And high stakes testing, by the way, costs a lot of money.
Well,
it really does.
there's another reason we're not necessarily fans of that then. So you are on the policy committee for the Forward Party.
Yes, I am.
So you've been busy with the Texas legislation here.
Yes. I can't. Well, this may not air before the ledge is over, but
Yeah.
I can't wait for it to be over. Part of me, I have to admit.
You were
Yes.
everybody I've talked to who's involved in that in some capacity has the same general. They're counting the days.
There were almost 7,000 bills that were proposed in this legislature, and they say this is not uncommon. That's pretty much how it always is. 1,000 will probably make it through. And I tallied up, and when I started it, I thought, when I got halfway through, I thought, why did I do this? Just looking at bills affecting elections, just election bills. There are 118 bills just having to do with elections. Never mind education, anything else. 118 bills just having to do with something having to do with elections. It was astonishing.
Oh man, well, yeah, you're doing. God bless you for digging into those things. We were talking before this aired that. My colleagues here with the podcast, we did our first episode where we actually kind of talked about issues specifically and was researching, these bills, several bills that were going through the ledge right now, and it's just the level of complexity and code and the way things are phrased as to where the bills are sitting. It's a lot.
And they look so simple. I mean, especially since you look at a bill and you go, "Oh, okay, well." that doesn't seem too bad. But then you've got to look, when you're looking at the web page, over at the bill analysis and the fiscal analysis and the intent, the statement of intent. And then you're going, oh, well, this isn't at all what it looks like. This is wholly different, isn't it?
The title can be very deceiving.
Oh, it
all
can
sorts
be,
of
and the
things.
wording can be very deceiving. The Forward Party has really been at the forefront with this, and I was so excited. We began tracking. We've had to focus, and so we focused in on mostly election bills pertaining to election and political parties, obviously, and we began tracking those bills. And I think there was about 20 when we first started. It's blossomed to about 30 bills that we were following. And then we got a subscription to something called New Mode. Mm-hmm. And so I follow and get updates, and every morning with my coffee, I run the bills to see what the changes are, and every evening I run the bills to see what the changes are.
You're like playing the slot machine.
I'm like playing the slot machine. You press run, and you look and you at the tiny print and try to see how things are going. And then if something catches my eye, I'll usually contact Rick and Nitish, who is the head of the policy committee, and say, I've noticed this, how about this? And they'll give me a thumbs up, but usually before they can get back to me, I'm starting to do research. And I try to research not only the bill, but all the wherefores of the bill, any history about that, so that when we craft a letter, it's not just, we don't like this. And so then I'll put together something, send it to Rick. He fine-tunes the wording in the way that only Rick Kennedy. Yes. And beautifully. And then he puts it on Nation Builder, and we send it out to all our supporters. And the response has been wonderful. And then we can also share. It makes sharing it so much easier.
Yeah, that's great. What else can you tell us about, and I know some of this has to be kind of like, we can't get into too much detail, and this will probably air after the session, so things may have changed that we talk about. So
at the start of the special session. Yeah.
So tell us what you're kind of what can you tell us about what you've been focused on with the team?
We've been focused mostly on, as I said, election. Personally, I've followed vouchers, and thanks to organizations like the League of Women Voters and Common Cause Texas, and a few other organizations that I send out emails through and stuff, like things like that. Forward Party has mostly looked at party organization and elections. Mm-hmm. And 3 bills have expanded, 3 of many, of the power of the Secretary of State to infringe on local elections. That appears to be a bit of a theme. And punishing people for problems with elections, which have you ever worked as an election worker?
I have not. No.
It's a lot of pressure, and so there have been a number of bills that make a little mistake, and you can end out having a civil penalty against you or a criminal penalty.
Well, and most of those folks volunteers too, right?
Well, no, you are paid. There are volunteers, but you are paid. I did it one day. It's generally senior citizens like me who tend to work these because we're available on a Tuesday to sit and do this.
Makes sense.
But expanding the power of the Secretary of State, that's the biggest thing. And that's been our big focus has been election.
Yeah.
Has been elections.
That makes sense. And so at this point in time, we're really just kind of getting our followers, our members excited and spreading awareness about these various bills that the team has identified, the policy committee has identified, or what ultimately is the Forward Party's goal from this session and kind of what we're doing after this related to policy?
Well, keeping an eye on things and activating people to put pressure on legislatures for bills like 1933, which for very vague and arbitrary reasons, at least it seems to me, vague and arbitrary. Someone may say, no, they're very specific reasons. But it seems very vague and arbitrary reasons. The Secretary of State can take over a local county administration for voting administration, and there is no way to appeal it. There's no way to challenge it. It's just done. Someone can make a complaint, and then there's a hearing, and then that can be appealed, and then ultimately it goes to the Secretary of State, who says, oh yeah, I think there's reason for me to do this. Things like that, to try and activate people to see what is going on.
Sure.
And to and that's probably been the biggest response we've had, is that one.
Well, that's a big deal. That's a pretty nefarious bill.
The background of the bill was such that it started as simply they audit elections all the time, and that's standard, and that makes sense. That just like you have business audits,
absolutely.
After an election, you're going to randomly choose and make sure everything's done right.
Every year, there's talk of election fraud, and especially recently,
Texas has very secure elections. That's what so many people say.
Not good for Texas on
so
that.
good for Texas that it is. So auditing, though, makes sense.
Yeah.
It does make a lot of sense.
Part of the process.
But what was a bill to increase the number of audits under a certain time, doing blah, 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 after the public hearing got turned into this Secretary of State stepping in thing. Mm-hmm. And so that was horrifying that they would not have a public hearing for this more onerous bill. So we're trying to keep the eye on the state for our followers, our supporters, to let them know what's going on, and outside. That's why if you get an email, please share it. And I know it might be too late. Also, like 1070, which was, and that's one I was just trying to think of. That's the other bill that we've really been looking at, pulling Texas out of this interstate ERIC, which keeps our election rolls secure and pretty clean. You know, people move from state to state, especially nowadays. There's so much moving. People move from state to state. They don't immediately contact voter registration and say, hi, I've moved, you know.
Yeah, you usually do that when the next election rolls around, if you even remember.
And so ERIC kept track of people moving if you registered to vote in a different state, and they also have you in their database as a Texas voter, or vice versa. People die, it's reported to ERIC, so they can send notice to clean the rolls. And there was a conspiracy thing going on about ERIC, that it was so silly, I'm not even going to say what they said they were doing. Yeah, let's not get into it. But conspiracy things about it. And so the wave to pull out of ERIC has hit a couple states. Florida pulled out of ERIC. Louisiana pulled out of ERIC.
Are all 50 or were all 50 states in it?
It was 32 states that were actually in the ERIC database. And the ERIC database has built over the last decade. This isn't something you can do overnight. It evolved, and they drew from different sources. They're very secure. So the push has been to pull out of ERIC. And the bill that was written does not say you pull out of ERIC. The bill that was written says that $100,000 will be used to design either a Texas-based system or to find a new system. But when you look at the information about the bill, you realize that in order to do this, you have to pull out of ERIC.
And they don't even mention that.
And that's not mentioned. But the way the system works is, it's like if you were going to school in one school and you decided, I think I'd like to look into going to a different school. Well, you're going to have to, drop out of the one school in order to go to the other.
Well, that's a pretty important thing to leave out of the bill.
To leave out of the bill. So it was written in an interesting way. So, we've been following that because it's very important to election integrity to stay in ERIC. And to let it fall prey to conspiracy new items. I guess.
I mean, this disappointing for sure. Mm-hmm. I think one of the big themes that I've seen is just there's a lot of power grabs going on in this session for sure, just across the board.
There are. But there are a lot of legislators who have worked against these. And you mentioned SB 8, the voucher bill. It is a coalition in the House of Democrats, or was, if this is in the past tense, and rural Republicans who say, no, we aren't going to let this happen. And so they've worked together with that to try and keep a power grab. 1070, it was one person saying, oh, wait, the way the justification is written is not completely clear.
What is 1070?
1070 was ERIC.
Oh, okay,
was pulling out of ERIC. And so, a representative said, so this isn't right, and it was sent back to committee, but then they changed not the bill, but the way the justification was written. So it was right back out. And so we've tried to activate people to, and those two
put the spotlight on. I think that's just at the very least just kind of saying like this is what the character. These are the tricks that your representatives are up to with your Yeah,
and I think that's why these
stuff.
two bills have had the biggest response with the emails we've sent out, because people got angry with what they saw was not above board, what they feel was not above board.
Yeah. No, I mean, as they should. And, I think makes sense for the Forward Party, right? I mean, free and fair elections, that's one of our foundational principles.
Foundational principles, yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yes.
So, just, I guess to wrap things up here, I'm curious too how you got involved in Forward Party before we stopped talking today. So were you always political, or when did you kind of move in this direction?
Yes, I've always been political. I told you before, my parents taught me to read using a newspaper. And so this is in the early 60s. So I would imagine my first words I read were, President Kennedy and probably Cuban Missile Crisis was probably one of the first, give you an idea of my age. I learned to read in a newspaper. My dad was a Kennedy Democrat, and his politics shifted after he came back from Vietnam, and mine did not. But I, over the years, became a more independent voter, and I like to vote for the person. So I have voted for libertarians. I have voted for Republicans. I admit that now. I have voted for Democrats. I have voted because I like voting for the person. Definitely. And I liked Andrew Yang. When he was running for president, I was a Yang gang, and make America think again. Math, the logo, I thought was great.
That makes sense. Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. And my son actually said, "Oh my gosh, Andrew Yang has a podcast," and I said, "Oh goodness." So I listened to the podcast, and he began talking about the Forward Party, and the idea that it's not top down. Because if I sat in a room of Democrats, there are things that frankly I wouldn't be able to say that I support or don't support.
Sure thing.
Because it wouldn't fit in. And if I were in a room of Republicans, same thing. But in the Forward Party, I can say what I think and say what I believe in, and they'll listen, and I'll listen to them. And that has been a tough learning. I'm going to say it has not been easy. The first time I walked into Waco, when we had our Waco meeting, I walked in the room and I sat down and I began listening, and I thought, oh,
this is what this listening thing is.
And these aren't my peeps. These aren't people I'm used to being around here, and I have to admit, it was, oh gosh, well, I wonder if I made a mistake. Well, I'm going to stay here today. And by the end of the day, even though I heard things I really didn't agree with, I also heard things I really agreed with, and people were talking about it. It wasn't, wow, how dare you say that? This is the way it is. It wasn't that way. And I had to listen. Yes, I did. I had to learn to listen, and it was amazing. And the experience has been that way since I first stepped into that room, since I listened to the first online Zoom meeting with Rick Kennedy. And the idea that it isn't top down, which is a whole different paradigm for people to grasp. It's really not what we're used to. We're used to these duopoly telling you this is what you believe if you're a Republican, and this is what you believe if you're a Democrat, and everybody else are just fruitcakes. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're taught. That's what we live. And the idea that isn't true, and that above there are values that we can agree on. And then the state says, okay, these are some things we'd like to see, and these are things we're keeping an eye on with elections. And then local governments, where it really happens, is what we're going to take these and find out how to make this work for our communities. That's exciting. And I know it's hard for people to go, but what do you believe? This is what we believe. We believe in you. We believe you can do it. We believe in your cities. We believe in your towns. We believe in your rural areas. And that's what the Forward Party is. And it's just exciting.
Beautiful. Beautifully put. Yeah, that's great. And I love, too, what you said about it's not easy sometimes to listen to somebody who doesn't agree with you, or you have wildly different perspectives from. And that's part of this too. And I think that's important for people to understand, because like when you first start with something like this, it's and we're gonna listen, but it's you're thinking of it almost as they're gonna listen maybe more to me or something like that, or we're gonna agree on the things we agree on. And there's part of it, but I think that idea that this is kind of, some of it's tough sometimes to have those difficult
really
conversations.
Hard. It is, and it's been exciting. It has, and as a teacher, and I'm a yoga instructor now. That's my retirement job. And a part of the training I took is active listening and not listening to answer. And you talk about that theoretically, but when you're in a room full of people or on a Zoom meeting with people and you're having to do it, it really puts your money where your mouth is. And it's been a great learning experience personally. Volunteering is wonderful because you feel like you're making a difference, even though there are people who say contacting the legislature, they aren't going to pay attention. Oh no, I believe they're going to see that we are here, and you are making a difference. And I firmly believe that 10 years from now, my youngest grandkid is going to be in a classroom in high school or college, and she's going to be studying this period in history. I'm not kidding. I'm serious about this. And she's going to see Forward Party and say, yeah, my grandma did that. She was in that party. I really believe it. We are a part. This is the chance in history to get this done. And this is everyone's chance. Do what they can. Be a part of it.
Fantastic. It's tough to sit here next to you and not believe it too. I think that's a great way to end this interview. Toni, it was a pleasure chatting with this.
Thank you very much.
Great conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everybody at home. This has been Brian Lee. This has been the Texas Forward Party podcast. We appreciate you as always for listening and hope to hear from you. Any feedback you've got about our podcast, any potential guests you want to see. We'll see you next week. We're not done yet. And we actually saved the best and most hard-hitting questions for last.
The bonus round?
The lightning round. Ah! Yes. You ready? You can study up.
I got my notes.
You can cram real quick. So what's your favorite thing about Texas?
Oh, favorite thing about Texas. Gosh, that's hard.
Told you they'd be hard questions.
Oh, man. I hate to say the culture, and it's funny, that was my favorite thing about Louisiana, but the culture, last night I went to a Texas festival in my town, and in terms of my little Burleson bubble there, the culture of Texas, the whole cowboy and friendly, and the rural and the Longhorns, that whole thing, I really bought into it. I love the whole culture thing, that culture thing.
Definitely. Okay? Texas pride.
I admit it. And I've lived in Texas a very long time now. So, next one.
Favorite book or movie?
Oh, favorite book. Favorite movie. Oh, that would be embarrassing almost. So I'm not going to do favorite movie. Favorite book. Favorite book would be A Separate Piece by John Knowles.
Okay.
Which I read in high school, and my daughter read it and my grandson read it. So it's like this multi-generational thing. I love that book.
And that's a fiction book.
It's a fiction book about some boys during going into World War II, wasn't it? And it's just incredibly well written. Coming of age, adolescent coming of age.
Nice. That's really cool, by the way, that story about how it's like kind of a generational.
It is. It was a multi-generational family thing.
Yeah, that's neat. If you could live anywhere else in the world, besides Texas, where would it be?
Besides Texas. For a long time or briefly?
Both.
Well, I'd stay in the United States if I could live anywhere else, and I'd love to be where, like, Northwest. I really like the
Yeah.
Northwest, Oregon.
I can see that.
Up around there. I love outdoors. I love trees and I love mountains and that kind of thing. And I got to visit there a few years ago. But I'd love to go live in Italy for a little while because my family's Italian. They were immigrants. And so I'd love to live in Italy.
Oh, yeah.
I visited it and I'd love to live. They're my people.
Those are your people.
Those are my people.
Nice. Are you a dog or a cat person?
I have a dog. I miss having a cat.
So kind of both. Right? Okay, fair enough. What's one word that attracted you to the Ford Party?
Thought.
And what's one cause or thing that you would like to see changed in your lifetime?
Ranked choice voting and can I lump together ranked choice voting and the elimination of gerrymandering? That is the biggest threat to democracy.
Will the judges allow those to be lumped together?
Election reform. How's that? We can put it together.
We will.
The judges have allowed it. Ranked choice
Okay.
voting
And gerrymandering, election reform.
They do go very close.
If I had to choose one, I would get rid of gerrymandering because you can possibly have a semi-fair election if it was not done that way. Gerrymandering, I think, is just, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
the biggest threat to democracy. I'm not kidding. I tend to be hyperbolic, but
Well, let's get it done, Toni. Let's get it done. Well, thanks again, everybody. Appreciate your time. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Toni.
Thanks
for coming on.